Hi cuties, and welcome to another Japanese history lesson with yours truly. This week we take a look at the Asuka period, which ran from 552 to 710 CE. There were two major parts of the Asuka period: the introduction to Buddhism to Japan and some Lion King type of political coups that seem never ending. There's a lot of confusing information ahead, so buckle your seatbelts and let's go back in time. I won't do that again, I'm sorry. Buddhism was introduced by immigrants from China and Korea and was initially opposed by more conservative clans, but was highly favored by the Soga clan, one of the largest and most powerful clans of the time. The imperial prince regent, Shotoku Taishi, and Empress Jito gave their official support of Buddhism, which would lead to great amounts of change in Japan's political future. Prince Shotoku would write the 17-article constitution, or in Japanese, Jushichijo Kenpo, which outlined the moral guidelines for the central government and was highly Buddhist and Confucian in tone. Thanks to their sponsorship, Buddhist art and architecture took Japan by storm. The first major temple being the Asuka Dera, but the most famous being the one founded by Prince Shotoku, Horyuji, which is in Nara Prefecture, and though it has been reconstructed over the years, still contains some of the earliest Buddhist art, which is so rare to find today. During the Asuka period, it's estimated around 624 temples were built, expanding the clergy and creating a new political power within that. At this time, international relations were pretty complicated with Korea, or at the time, the Kingdom of Silla within Korea. Japan had a colony in the southern part of the Korean peninsula known as Mimana, which they tried to hold against the Kingdom of Silla, which was trying to unify the peninsula by cultivating the southern kingdom of, I cannot for the life of me pronounce this name, I'm very sorry, Korean words are very difficult for me. So the kingdom that I cannot pronounce sent over Buddhist monks, architects, sculptors, tile makers, all kinds of people to Japan in the 6th century. And in the early 7th century, they sent over a priest who brought books, taught calendar making, astrology, and magical practices. All of this was done in an effort to gain Japan's support and aid against the Kingdom of Silla. And Japan on occasion did, but they were unable to comply with any degree of effectiveness, as getting the Kyushu leaders to prosecute a war on Silla proved inadequate. When the situation became dire, Empress Some herself went down to Kyushu to direct military activities herself, but unfortunately she died there in 661, and her successor was unable to prevent the destruction of the Japanese fleet in the Battle of Hakusukinoe off the Korean coast in 663. The loss of Mimana actually proved beneficial to Japan, surprisingly enough. It allowed Japan to focus on its internal development, and soon they were sending emissaries to China, although Silla had turned its back on Japan as it was trying to consolidate the peninsula. 20 years after the death of Shotoku Taishi and Empress Jito, a palace coup took place in 645 over a succession dispute against the Soga clan's monopolized government control. The revolt was led by Prince Nakano Oe, who would later become Emperor Tenji, and Nakatomi no Kamatari. The revolt is commonly referred to as the Ishii Incident, and together they took control of the court and introduced the Taika Reform. The reform brought new policies and practices, all intended to subordinate land and manpower to imperial authority, diminish the power of the leading families of the court, and provide an economic support system for the new structure. To implement the reform, provincial boundaries were redefined and headquarters and local bureaus were established. A census was taken, taxes were levied, and an official route for tax collection was created. Kofun mounds were actually forbidden except for the highest ranks, and other various funeral practices such as horse sacrifice were outlawed. But after Nakano Oe, or Emperor Tenji's death, another violent succession dispute took place called the Jinshin War of 672. Tenji's son was ousted from the throne by his uncle, who would ascend to the throne as Emperor Tenmu, although he would greatly strengthen his position by promoting his allies and demoting his enemies. He would also create the Asuka Kiyomihara Code, which would largely be the basis for the Taiho Code in the 8th century by the following emperor, Emperor Momu. However, Tenmu would first be succeeded by his wife, Empress Jito, who actively worked for her husband's projects, most notably the development of the palace and capital city in Fujiwara in 694. But after 3 years, she abdicated the throne to her grandson Momu. Momu would drop the Taiho Code in 701, which would remain in force until 757. Basically, these codes had Japanese people following Chinese form and policies while trying to avoid some of the pitfalls in the Chinese legal system. In the late 7th century, all aspects of Japanese life came under government control, from clothing regulations to currency in the form of coins called Wadokaichin. Momu also decided to build a larger and more conveniently located capital in Heijokyo, now Nara City. The move in 710 would kick off the next period, the Nara period, which we will talk about in our next history lesson. Until then, leave your questions in the comments below or on Facebook, Tumblr, and Twitter, and I will see you next time, cuties. Bye! another violent succession dispute.